Here we are at the glazing buckets. We are going to do dipping a whole piece. We'll do pouring the inside, dipping the outside. We'll dip in a couple different ways, and I'll also show you brushing on glaze. These are all different techniques you can use depending on what you're doing. So first things first, we need to decide what glaze we want to use. Check out the video about the glaze wall to think about combinations that you like. And once you decide what you like, we are going to go ahead and pull those buckets out. Double check that you're going to do it in the order you're supposed to. Make sure you're doing it how you mean to. Also, make sure you write down what you do so that when they come out of the kiln and you really love it, you can do it again, or if you hate it, you can be like, oh, never do that again. So I pulled out the cream breaking rust, the linen white, and the clear, and we're going to dip some pieces. The first piece we're going to do is this one that I did underglaze on, and we're just going to dip the whole thing in clear. We'll have waxed the bottom already, and we'll dip this whole thing. Now the clear can be a little finicky. It likes to be really thin, and it'll be thin in the bucket, but we have to be really fast when we do the clear so that we don't get too thick a coat. So the outside of this piece has underglaze on it that isn't fired on, and you can fire this on if you do it at green, but we have to be careful with it since it's got a coat on there. We can't just put water on it like we would usually. So we're going to have to be very fast in our dip. So here's the bucket. I've just opened it. And what I need to do is mix this up. We have a drill that we use to do mixing. We also have sticks. If you've just mixed the bucket up and it's sat for a couple minutes, you can just use one of the sticks up here to mix it up. That's fine. But if it's been sitting for a while, you really should use the drill. Now, I would recommend practicing with the drill if you're not comfortable with it. This is a pretty powerful drill, and the speed is determined on how much you pull the trigger. So you pull a little bit, it's slower. You pull a lot, it's really fast. If you're not comfortable with that, or if you're out of practice, practice in the washout bucket. This bucket is a washout bucket with water in it, and practice in here, see what it does. Practice moving the drill around. I'm going to use this in the bucket quickly. It's going to be really loud. I'm not going to talk till I'm done. So I was just cleaning off the drill because it was a little dirty from the last time somebody used it, and I wiped the stem off to make sure it was all clean because I don't want to cross-contaminate my glazes. I want to make sure this is clean before I put it in a new glaze. So when we use this, we're going to put it in the glaze, and we're going to gently scrape the bottom with the mixing head to make sure we don't have a bunch of chunky stuff down there. I don't have the drill on, I'm just using it turned off. When I feel like I've scraped it pretty well, I'm going to turn the drill on. Now, you're not going to be able to hear what I'm saying when I'm doing this, so I'm going to tell you what I'm going to do, then do it, and then we can talk about it. I don't want to hit the bottom or the sides if I can help it with the drill head. It can tear off pieces of plastic into the bucket, then we have to sieve the whole glaze. What I'm trying to do is evenly mix the layers of this glaze. Heavy stuff falls to the bottom, water goes to the top. So I need to kind of move up and down in the glaze and move around. If I stay in one spot, it can create a vortex that sucks a bunch of air down into the glaze, which we also don't want. We're trying to keep the air out of the glaze. So I'm going to move around, move up and down. You can even kind of turn the drill to the side and try to pull down the top layer and mix it into the bottom. What you absolutely do not want to do is break the surface of the glaze with the actual mixing head. It will spray glaze everywhere if the drill is on. So make sure you don't break the surface. So I'm going to go ahead and mix, and we'll talk after. So mixed it. I'm gonna set it down and feel around, see if I get some chunky stuff on the drill when I pull it out. Got a little bit of stuff in there, so I'm gonna mix it a little bit more. All right, so it looks pretty mixed. My glaze looks plenty thin on the drill. I'm gonna clear that off. I can see on the drill, the edges of it, where it pulls away, that this glaze isn't too thick. If I put my hand in there with the glove, you can see it sort of pull away and bead up. Glazes are different consistencies depending on the glaze, but generally they should feel thicker than water, but they should flow nicely. They should fall away and break over ridges like that. I don't want you to ever put water in a glaze. If you feel it's too thick, please let me or my technician know so that we can deal with it. So we've got a mixed up glaze, and it can sit for a little bit, but not very long. So I want to use it pretty quickly. This is my piece that I'm going to dip in the clear. And I know I want a thin coat, and so I've only got underglaze on the outside. So I'm going to put some water on the inside and swoosh it around and pour it out. And then I'm also going to use a wet sponge on the outside where I don't have underglaze and dampen it. This is going to help my piece not absorb so much water. So I'm using a sponge on the outside where there isn't underglaze, and I put water on the inside, and it very quickly pulls it in. So we want it to be damp but not wet. So that piece is ready for me to dip. These are pot dippers. They're on the sink by the glazing area. I'm going to grab this on the side, making sure it's nice and secure. I have a good grip. And I want to dip this in and right out very fast with the clear. And I want to make sure I don't end up with drips that I don't want. So while it dries, I'm going to kind of rotate around, make sure any drips get either shaken off or rotate it around the rim so it doesn't drip down the piece. So before it gets too dry, I'm going to wipe the bottom off of any glaze that has beaded up on it. Same thing to the sides that had wax on there. And then I'm going to set this down at a place to finish drying to the touch. When you take the tongs off, just be really careful that you don't drag it through the surface of the clay. So I'm going to rinse off my tongs now because they have glaze on them, so I can use them for a different glaze without contaminating it. All right, my tongs are rinsed and my piece is dipped. So that's dipping an entire piece. Really simple, really fast. Other glazes, you might want to go a little bit slower. You can do kind of a 1, 2, 3 count, but the clear needs to be really thin, so we go really fast in the clear. So we're going to cover that up, and we're going to open the linen white. Again, I'm going to mix this. That looks good. Again, that glaze is breaking. You can see the glaze pull away from the edges of the drill. However, this glaze is going to feel a lot thicker than the clear does, and it's supposed to. This glaze is a thicker glaze. It can get a little too thick, so we just want to avoid super thick layers. If you make your layer too thick, odds are it's going to peel off when it dries. So I am just rinsing my pieces in water since there's no underglaze on these. This is sort of my preferred method of dampening my pieces, is putting them just under the tap and then letting them dry. You can see where it's still shiny, it's still too wet, but it pretty quickly will absorb that water and be ready to go. It's cold to the touch, but it's not wet. It doesn't get my arm wet at all, but it's cold, so I know it absorbed that water. So we're gonna do another way of glazing, or another kind of style, which is pouring. So I want my inside to be different color than my outside, so I'm gonna pour the inside with the white. So I'm gonna get a clean container, dip it in there, pour it in, and then I'm gonna pour it out. And you can get a really well practiced at pouring glazes. I kind of spilled here, but if you rotate as you pour, you can kind of get a nice even coat. And then I'm going to wipe off any excess glaze from the outside while it's easy to wipe. And then I'm going to set this aside to dry out for the outside. The outside layer is going to be the cream breaking rust. But before I do that, I wanted to show you one other way of glazing, which is thinking about glazing two different glazes, but not necessarily like inside outside. You could choose to take the bowl that we've dampened, either with a damp sponge or with putting it under the water, and just dipping in half of it. And then shake off that extra. And now you can see half of my piece has glaze on it, half of it doesn't. And I want to wipe away any excess glaze that beaded up on the wax and set that aside. So I've done my whites. And I'm going to rinse out my cup, and I'm going to put this aside. Here's my cream breaking rust. I'm going to have to mix this as well. It looks like somebody tightened this one down, so a good time to show you this is a bucket opener. If someone tightens down the lids really hard, you can use this and pop it open. Don't try to do it all from one spot. You'll end up breaking the lid. And again, I'm going to mix this so it's going to get loud. All right, that one's mixed up. As you're watching me do this, you might be thinking to yourself, man, these glazes don't really look anything like the test tiles that I've looked at. Certainly the clear isn't clear. That's because glazes look very, very different before they're fired. They go through a chemical process where they change, so you really, really need to look at your test tiles and trust that it's going to look like that when you take it out. So, dipping. here's my piece that I poured the inside of, and I'm going to dip the outside. And I'm going to hold it by the foot, and I'm going to trap an air bubble in there so the glaze doesn't go inside except for just a little bit on the rim. So I'm going to have an overlap of the white and the cream bacon rust on the rim, but not on the other parts. So I'm going to dip that in, go all the way down to my wax line, come up, and shake off the excess, again trying to rotate. And you can see that I've got a few splashes of the red on the inside, but it's mainly untouched. Got a little bit of overlap on the rim. And that would be a finished piece, unless you had, if you're doing a glaze combination that didn't run and you were gonna put it again, another coat on the outside, or if you're just gonna go to the very top. Again, really pay attention to that video about the glaze wall and the over-unders to make sure you do what's right. We certainly don't want to do a double coat of something that runs all the way down the side of the piece. So that piece is done. I'm going to set it aside. Same thing with the piece I dipped in half. I'm going to hold it on the glaze side now, and I'm going to dip it in the other glaze. And these two glazes play really nicely together, so I can have some overlap there. And shake it off and wipe away the glaze that's beaded up on the wax. And then I've got a piece that's glazed half with one, half with another. I'm going to set it down. So those are 3 ways of dipping and pouring. Before I show you brushing, we want to talk about cleaning up. If you're finished with the glaze buckets, make sure they all get closed and put back underneath the shelf. Make sure you wipe up any drips that have gotten places. Make sure you clean all the tools that you have used. When you brush, you'll need to get a cup of glaze, so make sure you clean up after yourself doing that as well. One more thing about the glaze buckets. It's really important that you don't have a bunch of glaze buckets open at the same time. Things splash and splatter. We don't want to get things cross-contaminated, so have as few buckets open at one time as you can. We are now going to brush on a glaze to a hot surface. So I've already dampened this with water. I'm going to take a brush that has really soft bristles, like one of the bamboo brushes or one of the bigger brushes like this, and I'm going to get it coated in the glaze. Probably do this over the container. It can get a little drippy. Might stick my hand in there. And I'm going to apply this in about 3 coats is what you usually do for brushing on. And the first coat's going to absorb in pretty fast. And what we're trying to do is float the brush across the surface. I'm not trying to drag, because I want to like really have this full of glaze and just float across the surface. It's not going to be terribly consistent on the first pass, but as you do more, it should get more consistent because the piece will absorb more water and it'll kind of even itself out. Things we do to encourage that as well is, so I've done the glaze in this direction this time. So it's dry to the touch, so I'm going to go ahead and apply more glaze, but I'm going to apply it in the opposite direction. So I'm going to go vertically. And then the third layer I'm going to do at a diagonal. And those 3 layers combined should give you a nice even coat, and by altering your brush strokes, it should help it to not build up a lot of brush strokes, unless you want to. Some people do that purposefully. So I'm gonna clean off any parts that I got, any glaze I got on like the bottom of it where I have wax, and then I would be finished with the outside. Now you might ask, why would I go through the trouble of brushing glaze on a piece like this? Well, you probably wouldn't. You would probably just dip this. But there are lots of pieces that are an odd shape or really big, or that you want lots of different things happening that you might choose to brush. So this is just a technique you can use in any way you want. You probably wouldn't brush a small piece like this, but it's a nice way to demonstrate it. I'm going to set that aside, and we'll go put our glaze back in the bucket and rinse everything out.